Fresh meat.
I just want to apologize to Mike's mom and Josh's mom and my mom. And I'm sorry to everyone.
With that scene, a million parodies were launched. To say the Blair Witch Project was a hit would be a massive understatement. With a meager budget of $60,000 and a couple of cameras, this cultural landmark would go on to earn almost $250 million at the international box office. What followed was a deluge of independent found footage movies that hoped to capture that same lightning in a bottle, but would all fall very, very short in delivering a visceral and nerve-shredding experience that the Blair Witch Project did. Of course, when that many dollar signs land in a company's lap, the first thing they want to know is how do they get more? What they hoped they could get would be another monster hit that would draw people into the theaters. What they ultimately got was a film that did not meet expectations and would fall completely short of the hit the first film was. Yes, that means we're talking about Book of Shadows, The Blair Witch 2, here on What the Happened to This Horror Movie. After the massive box office of the first film, Artisan Entertainment was eager to get another Blair Witch film out while the fire was still hot. The creators of the original Blair Witch were more interested in letting the commotion die down before venturing into the woods again. Instead, they wanted to do a few other projects, and maybe circle back to the property. Artisan felt now was the time to strike, so they ventured off without the original filmmakers. While at Artisan pitching some film ideas, documentarian Joe Berlinger, known at the time for his Paradise Lost series, was offered 3 scripts to look at as potential sequels to the Blair Witch. He turned them down. They asked him what he would do for a sequel, so he pitched his idea, and they loved it. Given the green light, they told him he had only 9 months to deliver the film, as the release date had already been set. What Berlinger wanted to do was create a suspenseful psychological film that dealt with people's obsession with media, and how that can warp people's perceptions and be dangerous. The film would be ambiguous about what was really happening, and make the characters, along with the audience, question if anything that had been shown in the film previously had actually happened, or had just been a hazy distortion of the mind. Since you're watching a video called WTF Happened to This Horror Movie, I bet you can see how well that ended up going for Berlinger. In the reality that Book of Shadows is set, there is a movie called The Blair Witch Project. This has caused the town of Burkittsville to be flooded with fans of the film, and other filmmakers hoping to profit off it. The town is not really thrilled with this. Blair Witch tours abound, and we are showing people selling all sorts of Blair Witch merchandise. It's in all this that we meet Jeff, who has his own Blair Witch Hunt tour. He takes a diverse group of people out into the supposed haunted woods to show them various landmarks from the film. When they reach the famed Rustin Parr house, they set up camp for the night. Armed with cameras, they set up an area to capture any disturbances or weird activity. When they awaken the next morning, they find their campsite trashed and tapes missing. After looking through the disturbed campsite, the tapes are found where the supposed video from the first film was located. They gather up all their equipment and head back to Jeff's headquarters to see if they can find out what actually happened the night before. While some in the group begin to find weird marks on their bodies, others start to hallucinate. One sees and hears children who died at the hands of Rustin Parr, while others begin to find out that their activities at the campsite might not have been innocent partying like they originally thought. From the very beginning, we find studio changes that Berlinger was not a fan of. While his film was to be ambiguous and more psychological, Artisan had the complete opposite idea, wanting it to be more of a straightforward horror film. While Berlinger respected the first film, one of the things he hated as a documentarian was that Blair Witch had been marketed as a real documentary. He felt this kind of marketing was dangerous to people who would believe such things and hurt the intentions of real documentaries that were made to inform people about real events. His worry was that this would lead people to believe that anything shot on video had to be true. When he saw that a title card had been added to the beginning of the film, saying that this movie was a recreation of events that happened to a group of people while investigating the Blair Witch phenomenon, he was not happy. This again blurred the line between reality and fiction. While this film was an obvious piece of fiction, it was again marketed as being from a true story, just like the first one. From the very opening seconds, it was already at odds with the themes Berlinger was trying to get across. This blurring of lines led people to get trapped inside the media they were consuming, many now believing everything about the Blair Witch was true. One thing Berlinger was trying to do was make the first third of the film into a satire about people's obsession with the Blair Witch Project. In a way, thumbing their noses at people who were traveling to Burkittsville to find the actual locations. With this humor, it would make the twist into actual horror way more terrifying. The studio didn't seem to understand this, as they insisted that some reshoots be done, Added were shots of Jeff in an asylum a year before the film took place. Random glimpses of this were shown throughout the film. Berlinger seemed to think this would insist Jeff was the antagonist of the movie when no one was supposed to be the antagonist. Shots of gore were also added throughout. Quick cuts were made as almost a foreshadowing of what was to come. Berlinger noted his script was free from gore and that this was added in by the studio to up the blood and guts factor. Almost to show who they thought they were marketing the movie to, the opening song Witchcraft by Frank Sinatra was changed to Disposable Teens by Marilyn Manson. This song, over top of glimpses of aerial footage of a forest, intercut with gore, seemed to indicate the studio thought only teens wearing heavy metal shirts were into horror films, and that those horror films had to be filled with scenes of blood and guts. Anyone who had seen Berlinger's Paradise Lost films would quickly realize this was at odds with a stereotype Berlinger had fought against his entire career. The real-life subjects of those films were 3 young teenage boys who had been wrongfully arrested and convicted of murdering young children. The only real evidence used against them was they wore black clothes and listened to heavy metal music deemed to be satanic. Berlinger, on the Book of Shadows commentary, said how his vision of this movie had been twisted so much that he was worried people would view the Paradise Lost films differently. He made sure to state on the record that he 100% believed the boys from Paradise Lost were innocent. Even with this worry separating his documentary from the fiction work he was doing, the character of Sheriff Cravens had his over-the-top personality and one physical aspect based on a person he had met in his Paradise Lost travels. While he doesn't name this person, if you compare the sheriff's mustache and ponytail with that of the outspoken John Mark Byers, it seems pretty obvious who this was supposed to be. Throughout the film, the interrogations that are spliced in were supposed to have been a 10-minute scene at the end that showed what had really happened to them on the night they stayed at the campsite. The studio felt they should be sprinkled throughout. This again was at odds against the ambiguous idea of the movie. We are seeing where the characters ultimately end up rather than wondering where all this is leading to. Instead of wondering if what is happening is real or not, we know they get arrested at some point. Way to ruin the suspense, guys. One of the things Berlinger tried to do was move away from the expectations of another found footage movie. While the first Blair Witch relied on shaky handheld cameras, he tried to put as much steady camera work into Book of Shadows as he could. The first part of the movie seems to set the audience up for believing they are getting another found footage film with the interviews of the Burkittsville residents. These residents were the only ones they could get to agree to be in the film, as most of the town was angry they were coming back to make another movie. True to this movie's narrative, fans of the first film had flooded the area, and residents were not happy. With the characters, Berlinger wanted to show those who had been affected by the release of the first film. Erica was a Wiccan. The first Blair Witch Project seemed to deem all sorts of witchcraft to be evil, and the Wicca community was unhappy with how they were lumped in with an evil witch. Here, Erica is shown to be a practicing Wiccan, and even does a chant which left her exhausted. When Berlinger told this to his Wiccan friend, she informed him that the chant she was performing was calling upon the god of the underworld. This freaked out actress Erica Learson when she found out. The goth girl Kim represented the goth community, who had found the paranormal and outside-the-box aspect of the Blair Witch Project intriguing. The couple, Stephen and Tristine, were intellectuals who wanted to debate the mythology of the original movie. Jeff, of course, represented the people who only wanted to make money off of the original film. All of these people were affected by the original Blair Witch in some way, either being upset by its representation or trying to profit off of others' work. One thing that was supposed to work well during production was the animatronic owl. It was supposed to be in multiple scenes, but after seeing the owl in action, Berlinger was disappointed by how fake it looked. For the shot of the owl outside of a window, it was only shown briefly. Then, for the scene where it crashes through the window, they digitally went in to add wings because it looked like a giant potato being thrown into a room. It was supposed to have other appearances as a harbinger of death, but those were scrapped. Another aspect Berlinger regrets is the evaporating girl. While the girl was to represent the victims of Rustin Parr and the Blair Witch, it was intended to be portrayed as another possible hallucination within the group. This was to be achieved by her disappearing via point-of-view shots. A character thinks they see something, but when they look back, the girl would be gone. Instead, the studio opted for the girl to evaporate into thin air. Apparently, the Thanos snap even affects horror films from 2000. One aspect that seemed to work as Berlinger had intended was to take the horror out of the woods and transplant it into an interior space. After the events at the campsite, the movie moves to Jeff Warehouse headquarters. As they go through the displaced footage to find out what happened to them, the group disperses throughout the warehouse to either try and get some sleep or just to get away from the rest of the group. During this, many of the group are afflicted with visions or weird hallucinations that seem to show how they have been affected by the previous night's events. This leads to uneasy feelings of being trapped and unable to leave. In the original movie, the woods seemed to be an unending maze that kept the characters contained within its borders. Here, the characters are out of the elements, but are trapped within the walls of the warehouse. Whether it's by the bridge leading to the building collapsing, or a pack of canines keeping the group from venturing too far outside of the building, they feel that they can't leave what is threatening them. While shooting the movie, Berlinger made a distinction that any time a character is suffering from a delusion, it would be shot with 35mm, and anything shot on video was showing what actually happened. In these delusions, he also added obvious homages to classic horror films. The pack of dogs barking at the characters as they try to leave was a nod to The Omen, while the shot of Erica swinging backward around the tree was an allusion to Linda's dance in Evil Dead 2. While some complained he used too many tropes in this film, he laughed, saying they're homages he put in there on purpose. While Book of Shadows did make a profit, it was far from the box office juggernaut that the first one had been. Fans failed to embrace the movie at the time, dubbing it a complete failure to follow up what had been an amazing first film. There would be another sequel in 2016 that looked like more of a proper follow-up to the original. Adam Wingard took one of the original character's siblings and sent them out into the woods looking for them. It brought back the found footage shaky cam element from the original, but again failed to gain as much attention as the first Blair Witch. Berlinger has gone on to create more famous documentaries since this came out, and finally directed another fiction film with the Ted Bundy biopic, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. While this may not have been the follow-up many wanted to the Blair Witch Project, it is what we ended up with. Most fans seem to dismiss the film, but there is a loyal following that has made Book of Shadows a full-on cult classic. Some even prefer it to the original. Berlinger himself has described it as the ultimate postmodern sequel. It has none of the original characters, comments on the popularity of the first film, and questions the main character of the Blair Witch. Regardless of what people thought at the time, it has taught us that it's still not safe to travel into the Blair Witch's woods. Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.